Hello, I'm Will Leach. Welcome to the Commission Files. Now, not so very long ago, I was on one of my regular visits to London. We go to visit our two children who were born there and are building their lives there. And one morning, after all the hugs and hellos with my son outside Waterloo Station, we sat down in a coffee shop and he threw his backpack down in a chair beside us and I saw the label on it. It said, Madlug. Now, his elder sister had bought that bag for him and I smiled to myself because I knew they'd be pleased that we'd be making this episode soon. All about the man behind the Madlug label, the brand, the idea, the company, what gets him going. So welcome to Dave Linton of Madlug, entrepreneur, chief executive, boss, call him what you will, but also former youth worker, church worker and follower of Jesus Christ. Dave, welcome.
Thank you. It's good to be with you.
You're a businessman these days and I once heard you say to a packed room that you sat GCSE business studies and were graded unclassified. And look at you now.
Absolutely. Those were the days. Those were the days when school and me weren't the best friends. And that's a result of later in life finding out I was dyslexic. But in those days I just felt stupid.
Were you told you were stupid? So often children are.
Yeah, absolutely. You just were made to feel different. But looking back, a funny story of when I was at school, and I never really saw this as a dyslexic thinker, but we had to read books and you got prizes, and the person who'd read most books was rewarded with like a trip out with a teacher. And of course, you want to be the teacher's pet, but you're never smart enough to be that teacher's pet. So I would get a book, but I always chose books that had videos made of them. And I took the book, I went home, I went to the video shop, took the video out, watched it like Lion, the Witch in the Wardrobe and all those, and then was able to do the review, put it back. I was miles ahead of any other class friend in there until my best mate squealed on me one day.
There is the risk, of course, of a major plot change by Hollywood from what the book was, and then you're in trouble.
Yeah, I was prepared to take that risk.
Let's start with Madlug. There's so much to talk about, but the idea of why you founded Madlug, Make a Difference Luggage. Tell me why you and Judith were at a stage in your life where this thought came into your head.
Yeah, for myself and my wife Judith, fostering was something close to us, foster care. And we had done some short break or respite foster care from we were first married. I was working in a church as a youth worker. We had a house provided as part of the role, and it had an extra room in it that we weren't using, and thought, could we do more fostering? By that stage, we had moved from the Belfast area into the Lurgan area of Northern Ireland and a new trust. And having had a break from the respite, we thought, let's explore this. But they told us we had to go back to the start. Went back to the start. Week 4 of the training, showed a video of a young girl. She was sitting in a wheelchair and she made this statement. When we move, the local trusts, our local authorities, don't give us suitcases. Sometimes foster carers will loan us a suitcase, but more often our belongings are moved in black plastic bin bags and we'll lose our dignity. I heard nothing else the rest of that evening. And I was just left with this thing, I'm going to fix that.
Why did that resonate with you? Why did the bin bag bother you so much?
Well, I just couldn't get this picture. It was as if it was just, it just made me stop and think. To be honest, my wife didn't even hear it. It was as if it was just for me, that I couldn't get past the reality that they were putting children's and young people's belongings into bags that they would put rubbish into. And I thought, that's totally wrong. And the whole word of dignity that young girl mentioned was, it's not dignity to give them their stuff in a black bin bag. So that's what moved me. And I went home and started to research and look at the issue. Thought I would just go back to my after schools drop-in club and collect all the bags that, every year the young people change their bags for school. I thought I could just collect their old school bags. And then if they're like us, there's suitcases in the wrist space that they have, that you have that you don't use, or every time you go on holiday you want a different one or a new one, or you go to TK Maxx, you see a nice new colour or something like that. I thought we could collect those. But then started to realise and see that the issue was huge. The amount of children and young people in the foster care system in the UK and Ireland was over 90,000 at that time. It's now over 104,000. and statistics like one child moving every 15 minutes and most with their belongings moved in either black plastic bin bags or what today's bin bag is the plastic bag for life shopping bag. I thought, I can't really fix this with my young people. It needs a proper fix. So what's that going to be? So that's how I got into Madlug.
But the question of what's that going to be, it's a big, big step to say, I'm actually going to become an entrepreneur, find a business, get luggage, sell bags, whatever. That, you know, I can see a huge gap between the concept, the idea, the vision, and the happening. Most of us wouldn't have a clue. Most of us would never get there. You did.
Yeah, I think part of it is the journey of, being dyslexic, not being great at school, having that. But I am a super learner. I am so interested. I'm a sponge when I'm interested in something. So over the years, I had been really influenced by kind of leadership thinking. That you didn't have to have the qualifications to be a leader. I loved organizational structure. Working in the church, I could see how organization and getting teams to work and all of the stuff there. And I went to conferences around that. So I remember at a leadership conference hearing a guy, Blake McCoskey, who founded a company in America called Tom's Shoes, where he said he was traveling in South America. He noticed the children didn't have shoes. He had $5,000 and he thought, I'm going to fix that. But if I spend my $5,000 that I have in just buying shoes for those children, where do I get the next $5,000? So he started this shoe brand with this commitment of 1 for 1. Every time he sold a pair of shoes, he would give a pair of shoes. And they called it Tom's A Better Tomorrow. And I was inspired. This was about 3-4 years before the bin bag story came to me. But I was so inspired by that business model. And I was interested in that, the innovation of that. I was an evangelist of their brand, talked about it all the time. Never wore their product because it was never my style or didn't have the feet for it. But yes. It was just this reality of that was a great idea. Then the other part is I'd been 22 years in youth work, working in church-based youth work, and sometimes having to deal with funding. And funding and dyslexia is a tough one because you have to fill funding applications in. And that was something I was never good at. So I always used innovation to get around the funding applications to try and get the money through different means. I would do things and not do things as a result of that. And I hated all the reporting. So I just knew the leadership stuff that I learned about Dave, the background of education that I had. The reality was that going down a charity approach would not be the right thing for me. And if you're not good at that and you're running a charity type approach, then you need to run a few marathons, climb a few mountains. And I'm a youth worker with a youth worker belly from birth because I like my tray bakes and a few coffees.
So 2015, Madlug was founded, and you loved that business model of when we sell a bag, we will give a bag to a child in care who needs one. When you look back now, because 11 years ago as we sit here, Dave, exciting times, frightening times, stimulating times, how am I going to get through the next day times, we have no money times, we have lots of money, no we don't, this is hard, it's cyclical, blah, blah, blah. You says, well, you're a sponge, because you're picking all this stuff up and living this entirely different life from being a youth worker or a church worker.
Absolutely. It's, there is those days where it's like really tough. You're thinking, how do I pay the salaries next month? How do I do that? To the days when you get the phone call from some of the biggest companies in the UK and beyond. In fact, we've had some of the biggest companies in the world contact us and buy bags off us. And you get that phone call and you go, wow, and that sets you up. But then you have the tough days. And what I love about the doing the business part is every day is a school day. Every day is about learning. And it's about problem solving, and when you've dyslexia, that's a super weapon because you're not stuck. You find solutions to problem. It may take you a while to get it. You might not see it obviously, but you never see a total wall. You just see a fence to get over or climb around or get around, and so that's kind of how I've done business and just constantly been curious, asked questions, and got good people around me, people who have walked the path before me, people who are coaches. That's how I've done it. I love it.
So there's a foundation that gives the bags away. Is that right? What's the mechanics of all of that?
Yeah, so we just set up a community interest company initially, and I really wanted it to be business. I wanted it to generate its own income to do the impact. There was a number of reasons for that. One is the funding world wasn't getting any bigger because Dave arrived with this new idea. All it would have done would have sliced the pie smaller. It would have impacted the organisations that didn't have the business model and innovative idea to get funding. It was taking money from them. And what happens when that happens is you end up with a competitor mindset. So everyone's friends, but we're still competing. And I didn't want that because I knew that I wanted to be an ally for kids in care, and I wanted to be a champion and a partner and a friend of those who were doing amazing works in other areas of children and young people in the care system. So it's set up as a community interest company because I also didn't want to set a company up that Dave owned, because you're helping children and young people, based here in Northern Ireland. The challenge in that is that people think if you change your car, you build a house, you do anything, suddenly you're making loads of money off the back of a social need. And I didn't want that because of that context here. So I looked at the different business models. The different business models was community interest company, a locked asset business that was for trading purpose. But if I sold it, or if it was sold, or if it was stopped, all the money would be given to a charity or another social enterprise working with children and young people in care. So we started that. We can do everything through that. But then we realised that we needed to be really commercial to have that funding model. And the leadership requirements for a really focused commercial bag brand, when you're trying to be a bag brand, was different than being a really focused charity. And the risk was, if you try and do it all in the one organisation, you would end up with spending your whole days just talking about where the bags are going and missing the commerciality of it, or the other way around. So the idea of having the Madlug Foundation then set up as another company, but as a charity, registered charity, is that we commit to giving the money for buy the bags that we give to the children and young people after the sales into the foundation, and the foundation purchase the bags that go to the children, and they distribute those. Now, it's all done through the one group of people, but those are the two vehicles, and it just allows us with two boards to be able to juggle that, to be accountable. One to hold this when you're commercial, do what you say you're doing, and the other saying, have you done what we've asked you to do in the foundation?
I've had this experience in life when I see and they're grown up now, my two children doing interesting things that I think are fascinating, but I never had learned to do. I started them off, helped them, and then they raced ahead of me. And I always used to joke and say, did no one tell you this was hard? You didn't seem to know it was hard. You just got on and did it. And that's what I'm thinking of with you. I mean, did no one tell you this was really hard? You just went and did it.
Yeah, I think that as an entrepreneur, and what I know of other entrepreneurs now, is there's a stubbornness, and you don't see it. You're prepared to think it's not going to be hard. You see the vision, the picture of the finished, rather than the steps to get there. And any entrepreneur I know, and any visionary that I know, sees that end goal and the stubbornness to make a start. I remember Blake McCoskey in his book that I read very slowly before audiobooks were around. And he says, if it's so important, someday we'll take the dreams to your grave. If it's so important to you, just do it. And it was that moment I thought, how many dreams had someday robbed from Dave over the years? Because Dave didn't just turn out to be innovative then. Dave was still the same when he was at school. But I kept telling myself, I don't have a university degree. I have no money. Someday I'll have kids growing up. Someday we'll do this. Someday. And that was the thing. So I thought, this someday is not going to rob this one. I'm going to do it.
What does it say on a bag when a child is gifted it? Because it's a traumatic enough time to be moving. So maybe that isn't necessarily what they take in that day. But over the next few days and weeks, they will. What does it say?
So it says you are incredible, value, worth, dignity. And how that came to being was I met with a CEO of a charity in Northern Ireland that works with children, young people in care. Is bin bag still an issue? They said yes. I said, well, I have this solution. They said, well, I want you to do this. And Feste and I, who are the business support, they'll help you with the business model and do all that stuff through mentoring. I'll get you 4 or 5 young people from our interns who are care experienced, and they'll do a Dragon's Den with you. It was the hardest meeting I've ever had because I went with just an idea. And I sat down to them and told them what I was planning to do. And I used the word value, worth, dignity. I said, because you've huge value, huge worth, and you deserve to be treated with dignity. I kept repeating that, saying, that's my why. That's the foundation of why we're doing what we're doing. And they loved it. And they said, can we put that on a bag? And so that's where that came, that you're incredible, value, worth, dignity. But the other thing they told us was they didn't want the brand of Madlug on the bag visible when the bag was being used, because they didn't want to have stigma. They didn't want to be seen as a kid in care. Now, that's changing. The more we've built trust, the more young people know about us in the care system. They're so proud. They want to be showing Madlug. But at that stage, it wasn't. So then what we designed from that was a pack-away travel bag that on the packed up version, it says, you are incredible, value, worth, dignity, Madlug. That's it. When it's opened up, it's a 35-litre travel bag with no branding on it at all. So they removed the stigma. And that's how it came about.
And I've had fun looking at your website and there's videos and you explain yourself on YouTube and all the rest. It was all fascinating. You have to show how it works on a website. So you have a picture here and there of a child carrying a bag, but explain your philosophy of who carries bags, how that picture got taken, for example, and who you use and how and why to promote bags, because I find this very interesting.
Yeah, so it's very simple. Madlug will never use a child or young person to promote selling bags. We want the power of the gift. This is about the young person having value, worth, dignity. To me, the value, worth, dignity piece is giving with no expectation. So we're not giving them and saying, can we get a photograph of you receiving that bag, using that bag? We'll take the risk of never being heard about as a company so that we can give them that value, worth, dignity that they deserve. So any picture that we see, and we focus more on the bags, but any picture that you see with a child in it has been modelled. It's been set. It's been a photographer has taken their own kid and put it on to help promote what we do, to create the moment. There've never been young people that have received our bags. And in fact, we would even struggle to put an adult with care experience onto our promotion, unless the only way that we've done that is if there's a care experienced care leaver who is now in a professional place of either being a social worker, running their own organisation that is making a difference within the care system. Then we will allow them to be on a podcast or on something that we talk about. Yeah. And we stay away from that whole terminology of ambassadors, of getting key people, because, this is a gift. And a gift has no strings attached. And also, we don't want to use children to sell more bags.
Yeah, it's not a case of we'll give you this as long as it can make us look good. It's just we'll give you this.
And also, we don't want to have sad stories. It's wrong that children, young people have their belongings moved in bin bags. But we want to celebrate the change, the difference that can be made through the selling of a bag. So, we don't even want to be billboards, even with modelled of sad pictures going, child in care. We want to celebrate, buy that bag, make a difference, children moving with dignity. And that's what our aim is, to inspire, to motivate, to encourage people to get into that frame rather than getting into the, sad, pity. None of our Madluggers, the people who are carrying bags, are motivated out of a sad story. they're motivated because they can make a difference and make it a good story.
You talked about not wanting sad stories, so let's have some happy ones, some good ones. The term usually is impact stories. People, do they come to you and say, you know what, a bag came to me at a critical time in my life, or whatever? What do you hear?
Yeah, we hear lots of stories, and that's why young people with lived experience of care are our biggest fans these days, because we get stories back. And I can think of one story in November. It was National Care Leavers Month. We were in Leeds doing an event in partnering with a bank that we are one of our customers, and they have created, as a result of starting to work with Madlug, they said we want to do more than give bags, so they themselves created jobs for care leavers, and they've employed, I think, 30 or 40 young people who are care experienced into proper full-time permanent jobs within the bank. That's Lloyd's Banking Group. And at the event, we were running this pop-up event for 2 weeks. The senior executive team from Lloyd's Consumer Bank came to spend an hour with us. And in comes, around the edge, the young people who were employed. So it was this kind of marrying of the senior exec of the bank and those who were benefiting. In any other world, they would not meet. Yeah. In this world, they were meeting, and I shared the story along with one of the directors at Lloyd's. And afterwards, one of the girls that was an employee came to me and says, I just want to say, I love what you do. Thank you so much. I moved from foster placement into university with my stuff in 2 of your pack-away travel bags.
No.
And I says, I was totally like, wow, thanks for sharing that. That's amazing. What's your name? She told me her name. What did you study in university? She says, law. And I was like, wow, brilliant. Just as I was talking to her, one of the senior committee members, this executive, came over and didn't really know, but they had to say nice things to me. And I was talking to this young girl. I says, this young girl is on your team. She's been, introduced, and it was that's lovely. Nice to meet you. Do you know she studied law at university? I says, right. Well, that's great. She says, I got first class honours degree in law. And she said that, and this executive says, so what's your aim to be in the bank? At this stage, these jobs are created in telephone, customer service. She says, well, I'd like to get into the bank, learn it, but I would love to move at some point in the next few years into the law team. And this executive said, well, here's my name. Get in touch and I'll get you a coffee and an introduction to the person who's head of law within the bank.
My.
And it started because a young girl who was totally inspired by being given a bag, but not even that. She didn't have her stuff moved in bin bags, which is what happens. And the connections. And I could tell you story after story after story. I'd be here all day of those kind of encounters. I'll tell you one more. Last year I was at a big church festival, which we go nearly every year. And we were stand. And there was this young girl standing looking at our new products. And our new products for the last few years have been beautiful. I believe they're our best products. They're next level.
I have one. It's brilliant.
Yeah. And she was looking at it. It was this little sage backpack. And I says, have you ever heard the story of Madlug? And she says, I have. She says, that's my story. I says, well, didn't even ask her for a story. Wasn't going to try and get a feel-good factor. Just said, do you like that bag? And she says, I do. So I lifted the bag off the stand and I says, that's a gift for you. And I want you, every time that you wear that gift, that bag, that you say to yourself and know this fact, that you are incredible, that you have huge value, huge worth, and deserve to be treated with dignity. And I says, and every time you see this brand being worn by other people, they are also saying that they see you as incredible, that you have huge value, worth, and deserve to be treated with dignity. Next day, so the girl leaves. Next day, there was a mum and a daughter, and they came down and says, "Oh, we are that young girl you talked to yesterday. She stays with us. It's supported accommodation after they get to an age." And you made her day. Like, she was glowing. What she didn't tell you was when she came to live with us, her stuff was in 2 bin bags. 3 days later, her stuff arrived in a transit van full of bin bags. And simply that bin bag story to a girl walking away with a smile on her face, feeling seen, feeling cared for, feeling loved, feeling that she has huge value, huge worth, and somebody has treated her with dignity. And she's seeing people wearing the brand and connecting the brand to her. Was just, that's what it's about.
You're listening to the Commission Files. Time for a quick break.
He was a soldier in a harsh world.
Marker! Stand fast! Commander, wheel on him through 90 degrees. Now, let's see what kind of mess you make of that.
He made enemies.
That chap in Caesarea, I was merely wondering if he had become disaffected somehow.
He had a waking dream.
Cornelius.
What? Who is that? Show yourself. Who are you? What are you?
But he found what he was looking for.
You are a new creation.
Commission Drama presents Cornelius, The Search. You can hear this series and many others. Just search for Commission Radio Drama wherever you get your podcasts.
Hello, this is Drew Gibson, here to remind you about Commission's sister podcast, Faith, Hope and Sport. Great interviews, great sporting stories, and plenty of reflections on how lives of Christian faith and competitive sport can be lived together. Find us wherever you look for podcasts. Just search for Faith, Hope and Sport.
This is the Commission Files with Will Leach, and I'm chatting with Dave Linton of luggage and bag company Madlug. You're very driven in a very positive way, but very focused. And I'm going to ask you about growing up, because that definitely must have contributed to the way you think the way you think.
Yeah, so when I was 5, my dad died. I come from a family that were very supportive, but my dad died at 5. I had a sister at 3. And I can't really remember much, if I'm being honest. All I can remember is that we were in a caravan and he had taken a heart attack. And in those days, you couldn't get in to see him in hospital. You know, you sat in the car and then three or 4 days later, he died. And nowadays, he would have been out in the same day, probably with a stint and all of the stuff. But in those days, he just left you on a wee monitor and checked every so often. And we lived in a house. It wasn't a housing estate. It was a bungalow in a relatively nice area of Newton Abbey. And my dad was the only one who worked in the house in the family. My mum didn't drive, and suddenly she's left with 2 children. And at that stage, she had to get a job. She had to learn how to drive. But that resulted in us growing up in an area where we lived that didn't have what others had. So poverty was right on the doorstep of us. And also we had social worker involvement, because in those days, you were vulnerable children, young people. So my mum had a social worker supporting her. We got to do things at Christmas. We got presents, the stuff that the radio stations do. We would have got all that stuff. But what kept me out of the care system, and there's times where my mum did struggle sometimes with just keeping all the plates spinning, was that there was significant adults around. There was there was neighbours of ours who their sons were 3-5 years older, and they took me under their wing. They took me whenever I was 15 or 14. They took me windsurfing with them when they were all driving in their cars. They treated me like brothers and significant adults. Their parents, the neighbours, they took us on holidays. They were there when my mum was working and opened the door, and we were able to go there after school. All of that stuff. And I wouldn't be where I am today without the power of the significant adults. I wouldn't be probably as involved in church work over those years without the power of the significant adults. I would never have been driven to to be in that place to help those on the edge, those the most vulnerable. And then my whole youth work life was always about right on the edge. It was the young person that most youth workers wanted to put out, or youth leaders didn't want in. And those are the ones that I loved working with. And that was because the power of significant adults, the underdogs, and I was an underdog.
Because you got them, and therefore they got you.
I was just real and honest and not trying to be anything. But with that comes its own challenges, because, then people struggle to put you in a box. And
yeah, happens. It brings us very nicely round to your faith story, because you were around church folk, Christian folk, who were being significant in your life. Was that new to you? Had you been a Christian family?
Yeah, so my grandparents were, and my dad's family were. My dad wasn't walking with God until he was on his deathbed, and then he recommitted his life to Jesus. And my mum was a kind of church-goer type person, to do good. My mum was probably the biggest influence on my life when I reflect on her life. But there was grandparents, there was aunt and uncles, and then it wasn't even the neighbours. The neighbours' kids were Christians, but the neighbours weren't. And it was just this whole, so church was a part. I had people pick me up, take me to BB. So Boys Brigade's where I met Jesus for the first time. It was whenever I had a captain who really took an interest in me and made me feel. And I remember 2 years after my dad died going, I won't accept Jesus, because for God so loved the world that he gave his only son, that whoever believes in him should have eternal life. And that was me going, I'm ready, at the age of 8. And so that was really, really significant. But it was the people around that picked me up, took me to youth fellowship. When my mum was working, she went and trained and worked in the hospital in her life. But she came from nothing to that. But that was the significance of all of that.
You said that you in school didn't really get on. So when you left, bit of construction, was it at first? What did you do first? Yeah,
so the gift that I had when I was at school, I could talk. In those days, it's harder, I think, of a young person today. You can't get even an interview without a qualification. Mm. But in those days, you could get an interview. And I had a vision to be an architect, but not the brains for an architect. And I did, my best qualification came out of Tech-Tron. So I went into the construction industry and went to tech as well to do architectural technician. And I worked on the Whitewell Church. That was my last job, the last team I was on. That was a big building at the time. And I remember that well. But then a recession hit. And the part of me was, looking back, I was probably a bit, if my own kids did this, I would be, pretty annoyed. But for me, I just went, it's over. And I ended up 6 months unemployed. And people were thinking, Dave's going to struggle here, and didn't know what to do. And I remember the church that my granny went to in Belfast, North Belfast. They had some funding, and I got £10 on my unemployment benefits. And I went and helped out. I became a youth worker helping out. And then I did another program. It was all Baptist church. And I did another program that was a little bit more money. And I did that for 2 years. And in that time, the person that was leading the youth project said, you need to go to Bible school. And here's a good Bible school to go to. And he encouraged me to go to Capernwry Hall in England. And that's where I went.
And that led inevitably then to youth work, to church work. And I imagine because you liked folk on the edge, that was a fascinating, interesting, very rewarding time for you, doing that kind of business so far removed from construction, but you did know how the world worked.
Yeah, I would say there's an element that's similar. It's more cultural architecture. And it's when you're interested in buildings, you're interested in people, you're interested in creating better places, you're interested in creating better people. So there's a cultural architecture there that goes on. I think I've used that a few times, that I love architecture, but I love culture and an influence in that. So it was an easy move, but I love people. I love people, and I never thought I would ever retire as a youth worker. I was one of those youth workers that didn't see myself going into being the minister, because that would kill me. But I always saw myself being in youth work. And yeah, that's just who I was. I had a vision to just retire as a youth worker.
Youth workers have to know about a lot of stuff these days, about paperwork, about safeguarding, about fundraising, about grant getting, all that stuff. It's
that's why God's taken me out of it.
You see, I wanted to ask you about that because people put people in boxes, whether you want it or not, and you said you don't like that and you don't want to do that with people, which I have a lot of sympathy for. And yet people would have said, Dave, you work for the church. Why are you leaving that world to go into the world of business, which people who aren't in that world often don't understand? They think, well, it's about profit. It's about the capitalist motive. I'm interested in biblical principles. Now, there doesn't have to be any kind of sellout, but in a lot of people's heads, it is. I mean, did you get the right support? Did you get people being very suspicious and negative of the move you were making?
There's a couple of things to respond to that. Simply that, having worked probably most of my life in the church world and seeing it, I have to probably confess that I wasn't really aware of the business world, and actually it made me less aware of the people that I had as volunteers. And I've had to confess a few times and repent that I probably misused volunteers with expectation, not realising the mission that they were in every day and the capacity that they had every day and the importance it is for their family. And when we're in the church world, no matter how much we see it as a God-given opportunity and a blessing, the reality is that it's human people who are in leadership. And we have that natural desire to be better, to see improvement. So if I'm a pastor, I want to have the biggest church. If I'm a leader of a youth group, I want to have the biggest youth group. That's natural. It's not necessarily right, it's natural. And at times when you're in that and you feel God's called you and God's given you this vision to have this amazing church youth ministry and connect with the communities around you and people come into faith, sometimes you can, I think, in a church world, sometimes be so driven that you don't see the people around you and the world that they're in. So I'm seeing it because I had never come from the kind of business world into the church world. I've come totally from this church world where I didn't really understand the people around me. So I'd say nowadays what I'm probably more passionate about is that our mission is in the place where we work. Our parish is the people that we work with. And it's important that what we're prepared in here is to be what we're outside, to be real. So what sets us apart is when we're speaking, when we're doing things, we're not swearing every minute. We stand out as Christians, but stand out because we're different, not because we're, the risk I think in our world today is that we try and get everybody to be in the church mindset. And so we tolerate the jobs we're in. We moan about the jobs we're in because we want to be more in what the pastor, or want to be at the prayer meeting, or want to be, and that's all really, really important. But for me, the real mission is the people that we do life with. Those are the significant adults. We can be significant adults to our colleagues that are struggling, to our young people we're working with. That's the world I'm in at the minute, and I'm glad that I didn't have it before ministry, because it's given me a fresh set of eyes to be more passionate about Jesus than I've ever been. But to be in a world that I have no desire to be in ministry any full-time. I'm in where God has called me right now.
You, in Madlug, are a business that sells bags. You're a business with a Christian perspective. You're not a mission organisation. You're not a business with a Christian focus in the sense of our business is Christian orientated. You're just selling bags and having a social conscience, I suppose is the best way to put it. What a very interesting way of describing things, because a businessman sat me down once in a church context and simply said, you do know it isn't the pixies that pay for everything in society, that unless wealth is created, it can't be given and donated and gifted and used for God's purposes. And God gets that even if you don't. And I was really humbled and chastened the day he explained all that to me, because it hadn't been my world and I didn't understand it. Do you ever get, you talked about not swearing and standing out. Do you stand out in board meetings and business meetings and pitch meetings when the big companies talk to you? Do you notice yourselves getting noticed?
People notice it because I would do a lot of keynotes. I would speak in front. And the world of business is often about power. And so people's power is they might not have a lot to say, so they use a few swear words. They do it. Even the females are like that. It's just this kind of like authoritative, nearly like it's badge of honour. And Dave doesn't do that. And what happens is people come and ask, are you a Christian? And I've always said from day one, when I'm asked that question, it's an absolute yes. And that's the marker of it. That now, is it easy? Absolutely not. Is there boardrooms where you have to sometimes be strong? Absolutely yes. And the biggest challenge is when you're, is wrestling with yourself and making the right calls and at all stages. But I've been asked a few times, Will, why did you put this story into a book? And my answer to that is simply this. I will not put my story into a book until the end of the story. And the reason being is I want the story to be one that leaders read, whether they're Christian or not. And I want it all to be about Jesus. And I want it to be true to go, he was the guy who was fair to his staff. He was the guy who never swore on stage or even in meetings. He was the guy who was different. You could see the integrity, but he was a guy that got stuff done. And it's all celebration to the one who has called me, which is the one who's doing it in and through me every day, which is Jesus.
You're motivated, you've said often, for the people who never get a chance. And you could argue that perhaps you had an idea of that, but I think you had an inkling of it because you got lots of opportunities when you look back. When you're young, you often don't see what people do for you. You realise it later. Where's that burning desire come from for people who never get a chance? Just from having met lots of them or fostered them or whatever?
I think it's down to, for me, it's at the foundation, it's my faith. Absolutely, 100%. That there's so much talked about the orphan and the widow, the fatherless. And for me, I was an orphan. Orphans defined as a child who has lost one parent. So I was an orphan. So for me, it's like I can't read the Bible and not see what God's called and what God's heart is. And I also believe passionately that we, as Christians, it's not about surrendering a life to try our best for God. It's actually one of surrendering ourselves to God. So it's allowing, as I step out every day in faith, not sit in an armchair and go, God, just open the door for me and I'll wait till you. There's a step of faith to be a good boss, to be a good employer, to be a caring person within our society, to be a faithful, committed church member and part of that community. There's a stepping in faith, but the actual one who makes it right and does the work is actually the Holy Spirit in us and through us. Christ in us and through us is the way that this happens. And so for me, that's the foundation of all that I do. That's why I'm driven. That's why I still get excited, because I actually believe the only reason we're here is because God hasn't finished his mission.
I'm going to bring this back to bags to finish. When you're out and about in life, and I know you're travelling a lot, airports, railway stations, waiting rooms, whatever, if you see a Madlug bag, can you control the urge to go over and say, where'd you get that? What do you think of it? Do you intervene in people's lives? Because if it was me, I would, you see. I'd be right in there.
Yeah, I've actually been at a place where I see lots of them and I don't have that urge.
I commend you.
I've had a couple of times where I've had fun with it though. And I've seen somebody with it and I have a chat, where did you get your bag? And I rarely would say that I'm the founder of it. It's So they tell me the story, and then I have a bit of a laugh into myself. Or people
Because they have no idea who you are.
Absolutely, are walking beside somebody in Belfast that has the Madlug, and I've got my Madlug on, and you're just going. They don't realise the person is right beside them. So I have a bit of fun to that. But some of my team are different. I remember we sold bags to an academy apprenticeships scheme in a large company, and we were sitting in Gatwick Airport, the team, myself and a few of the others, on our way back, and off the plane that was just arrived in Gatwick, we counted 50 Madlug bags just getting off. All the same, it was like an army of Madlug. Well, my team, she heads over and says, "What company with? What company? There's the founder. And I'm going hiding myself.
Why did you do that? Yeah. Well, listen, thank you for what you do. Don't change, don't stop. I love the thought of you, because you're sitting here in a sweatshirt and a baseball cap, and I'm imagining you in a suit in a pitch meeting and imagining that. But thank you so much, Dave, for telling us your story and joining us on the Commission Files. It's been fascinating. Thank you.
Thanks for having me.
And thanks to you for listening. If you don't follow us, why not do that? Just hit follow or subscribe if you haven't already. Commission's a charity. We operate through the kindness and generosity of supporters. If you want to help, please do try commissionradio.org. If you'd like to learn about making radio programmes or see what a suite of top-class radio studios look like, again, try commissionradio.org. There are other ways to support us, and you'll find links to the things you might look for: YouTube channel, Instagram, Facebook, LinkedIn pages. And I will be back soon. Until then, bye-bye.